So basically, we just wanted to thank you for taking the time out and talking to everybody out here in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and hopefully you could fill us in and spread some information that we can spread out here for people in the area.
Sure. Where would you like me to start?
Maybe some background on the lawsuits and what you see taking place going forward.
Sure. So I'll do quick background on the three different cases. The most everyone's somewhat familiar with them, and then kind of talk about where things will likely go. So there is three different class action suits that are currently happening in the industry. They're all very similar in their foundation, in that sellers have gotten together with a bunch of very large class action law firms. These are not ambulance chasing law firms. These are the biggest class action firms in the world, and have filed claims. Essentially, it's based upon the idea that they think there is a conspiracy in the industry to prop up compensation in the industry through rules that are built into the multiple listing service. So the conspiracy looks something like this. You have the National Association of Realtors that sits at the top. They govern a majority of the MLSs in the United States, meaning the rules that they create out of committees are pushed down to the local MLSs, and the MLSs essentially enforce those rules. You have the defendants in most of these cases are the large franchisors. So Anywhere, which controls Century 21, Coldwell Banker, Corcoran, ERA, all these different brands are all part of that. Remax, Berkshire Hathaway or Home Services of America, and Keller Williams. They pretty much named all the big ones in there. Those companies have probably 40 to 50% of all realtors that work for those firms. Those firms have people. This is the bullshit part of the conspiracy, but they have people that sit on committees at NAR that help govern policy. And so you have NAR setting rules. You have the large franchisors with people that are supposedly sitting on these committees setting rules. And then you have what we call the broker co-op policy inside the MLS, which is when you list a property, you have to offer compensation to the buyer's agents through the MLS. Now, that can be as little as 1 cent in some MLSs or $1, but there is a rule that essentially states that you have to offer cooperation through the multiple listing service. So that's the third piece of the conspiracy. The fourth is what we call CCP, which is the policy that was enacted in 2020, the Clear Cooperation Policy. And that policy states that if you have a listing, you have to put it in the MLS. If you're a member of the MLS and you have a listing, you have to put it in the MLS within 24 hours. And that, if you think about it, thereby guarantees cooperation on the other side of the deal. So the way that this looks at is they're basically saying that there's this whole thing to prop up compensation. You have NAR, which controls the majority of the industry and MLSs, writing rules. You have the major defendants in these cases. As I mentioned, those 5 different brands have people on these committees. You have the MLS requiring cooperation in the MLS. And now you have CCP that says everything that you have as a listing, you can't do it off market. You got to throw it in the MLS. And now you're looking at sort of the connection. They are also, which we haven't seen the evidence, but I know it exists, that there is a lot of, documentation that they'll show where brokerages have said, that you can only do it at a certain percentage of compensation, that they'll use as examples or exhibits in their case to show that commissions, quote unquote, aren't negotiable, even though we all know they are.
Like in-house company rules where they say nothing lower than X.
Correct. And so that's one side of it. Now, these are civil cases. And the important part to remember about this is that everybody in this industry just has this candidly all wrong. So there's civil cases. That is home sellers and essentially lawyers that are running these civil cases through the courts. That is nothing to do with the Department of Justice at this point in time. The DOJ has its own investigations that it's been doing inside of policies that NAR has put into place. And yes, there was a settlement between NAR and the DOJ so that they would stop the investigation into the clear cooperation policy. That policy only, for clarification, the DOJ can investigate other things that it wants, but it's two tracks that are currently happening within the industry. So these cases were all filed in 2019 and 2020. You're going to hear, you know, NAR and others talk about how this is going to take a long period of time to play out. Well, it's 2023. So we've already had a lot of time. The first case goes to trial in October this month, as in the 16th, like as in 13 days. Two of the defendants have already settled, which is Anywhere and Remax, for basically 50% of the amount of cash that they had on hand. I've been saying that this would all end in settlement anyway for a long time. NAR is going to fight it. My personal opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, so it means all of nothing, but I don't think they should be. I think they should be settling, and I candidly think they're going to settle anyway because they will probably lose. I don't want them to be clear. I'm advocating for NAR to win. I want them to win. I just don't think they will. I think the case that plaintiffs have and the evidence that they have and the general climate of where things are in our society don't bode well for our industry in a civil case. Again, we'll see, because they're going to fight this and it goes to trial in a few weeks. Where things get really interesting is, and this is why I've been very vocal about this, our industry, when we talk about this is going to take years to play out. Well, one, we're going to trial in 2 weeks. Number two is, even if whoever loses is going to appeal, and everyone's like, oh, it'll be years before this is resolved. That's partially correct. There's a lot of inaccuracy with that statement. Number one is the appeals process will happen, and that will take years to go through. And that's when we're talking about the damages. So when you're dealing with these cases, this is federal court. These are antitrust claims. These are violations of the Sherman Act, is what they're claiming. These cases are, the damages portion is very severe. It's damages awarded and then treble damages is how class action cases work when they're antitrust claims. So it's damages times 3. And you're hearing all these stupid, crazy numbers of like $30 billion and just complete utter nonsense. The reality is lawyers don't file cases to bankrupt companies. They're not in the business of being a nonprofit. They're in the business of being for profit. So all of these wild numbers that you've been hearing people talk about are just completely stupid, in my opinion, because they want to come up with a number for their clients to walk away with some cash. That is proven by the 2 settlements that have occurred already. So the fact that Anywhere had roughly 178 million in the bank, they've settled for 83.5 million. We're looking at basically half. There's still one case they haven't settled yet. Remax just settled for $55 million. They had 98 million in the bank. Like, it's obvious the lawyers want to find something amicable so that their clients can get money. So all this shit of like $30 billion is just completely nonsense in my opinion. And that's been proven kind of by what's happened currently. The important part though is this. This is the part our industry is being completely blind to. This is federal court. This trial is in Missouri specifically. So the plaintiffs are in Missouri for this first case. This is Burnett, Sitzer versus NAR and the other defendants. That judge has a right to enact the injunction that plaintiffs are asking for in this case. The plaintiffs want to see cooperation in the MLS cease to exist. I'm not talking optional, where you're hearing a lot of rhetoric out there. It's like, oh, well, we'll just change it from being the minimum dollar amount of $1 to the buyer to being zero. That's what we call optional. If the cases went where the end result was cooperation in the MLS was optional, just you could offer zero. Candidly, there's not going to be much change the way our industry does things. That's going to be very little impact because we have a use case in the Northwest MLS. And I'll shut up in a second so you can ask questions. This is an important part I want to make a comment on. What they don't realize is that if the injunction plaintiff is asking for, and this judge decides, if he decides that he thinks that what is occurring is so severe that they want to see this injunction enacted within the MLS, as in it's not zero, that's in there's no more cooperation in the MLS, just no longer exists. That's a whole different ballgame than what we're talking about from optional to a straight outright ban on cooperation in the MLS. And to be clear, because this is federal court, this is a federal judge, he can and has the complete authority to not just enact that injunction in Missouri. If he decided that it was such a significant impact and was harming consumers enough, he could enact that injunction federally across all 50 states. So there could be, I'm not saying this is going to happen, I'm saying there is a possibility. The lawyers I'm talking to, they say 50-50 chance that judge could enact that injunction. Now, it wouldn't be instantaneous. There'd have to be a period of time for that to take place. But let's hypothetically say 6 months. Like, the whole concept of cooperation in the MLS could cease to exist. And that will certainly have an impact on the way we do business. And I'll stop there, as I know you got a lot of questions.
So that injunction, that would go in effect immediately?
No.
No, that would be a time.
There'd have to be a time frame. The judge wouldn't, I mean, I'm not the judge, to be clear, but in sort of precedence has been shown a significant change like that, they would agree and negotiate a period of time. NAR asks for a year, the judge comes back in 90, we end up at 6 months, somewhere in there, like 90 days to 6 months. There needs to be time for your forms to be updated, the MLS data fields to be updated, et cetera.
So what do you think the chances are on that being put in place with no cooperating compensation being offered in the MLS?
I'm speaking to some pretty significant lawyers that I'm talking to. I'm not going to disclose who, but just there's, my contacts are pretty heavily involved and are talking to defense lawyers and others. 50-50. I'd say 75% chance that NAR loses this trial. And again, I hope they don't, but like, I think plaintiffs have a very good case. Here's the crappy part is you can look at this two different ways. So the Northwest MLS enacted this policy last October, so a year ago, where they made it where you didn't have to offer any cooperation in the MLS. I should rephrase that. You can be zero. So like, the field for offering cooperation became, you could put 0 to whatever you wanted to do, essentially. The irony of it is it hasn't changed anything. Very, very minimal impact. Like, the whole concept of cooperation still exists. Sellers are still offering, whatever they negotiate with their agent. Like, it really had very little impact. So you can look at that two ways. You can look at that from the standpoint that, my opinion, and I'm going to end with this in this conversation eventually, is that I think the DOJ and the Federal Trade Commission, which no one's talking about, the FTC, is absolutely going to see that as why they want to come in and completely change all the policies. And I think that our industry is being completely naive to the fact that there's a whole other thing going on over here besides these civil cases, which is why I do firmly believe, even if these civil cases, we won them, I 100% believe this is not a political statement. This is a fact, and I'll explain my backup on this. That under this current administration, you will see the FTC come in and rewrite the rules, and I'll explain why in just a minute. If there's a change in administration, candidly, from Democrat to Republican, you could see the FTC's power pulled back, and then I wouldn't be as confident saying that there would be a change. But there's a lot of pieces here. The civil cases we'd have to win. There'd have to be a change in administration. Like, there's a lot of wild cards to pull together. I am in the camp 90% certainty that cooperation in the MLS is coming to an end. It's simply a matter of when. that's coming to an end. That's different than the Northwest MLS. So my comment here is you are seeing, and I just got notice this morning that NER has now clarified their position. It's not public yet. It probably will be on the newswire momentarily that, all MLSs can now essentially remove the required compensation from $1 to, or 1 cent to 0. Given this was going to happen, the MLSs are going to do it anyway. So you're moving to this what I call optional base anyway. And this is essentially to help stop further litigation and things, but we are moving to a different world, and the industry needs to get its head out of the sand and realize this stuff is coming. And I have more to share in just a minute, but I'll stop there and see if you have additional questions. So.
Well, I was just going to say the case that you said was in Minnesota or wherever was
Missouri.
So if that one votes not in favor, like the federal judge doesn't decide,
Jury.
The jury, they can just, won't another case come up that won't there just be more and more cases?
Well, there's 3. So, and good lead-in question. So this first case in October is Burnett, Sitzer versus NER and the other defendants that I named, the major franchisors. Now, keep in mind, Anywhere and Remax have already settled this case with them. And it still hasn't been approved by the judge. And to be clear, there's likely going to be DOJ intervention like they just did with MLS PIN. It's a whole other part of this. Very complex, by the way. The second trial is Morel. Morel's based out of Illinois, and that is a massive class action suit. It's in 20 different markets across the United States. That is the biggest class action case that's happening. I want to be very clear about this. If they lose this case in 2 weeks, there's no way, maybe there is unless the lawyers are completely stupid, but there's no way NER doesn't settle Morel and the others. It just wouldn't make any logical sense. It's a risk to be taking this case to trial anyway, because technically speaking, they lose, and the damages, are severe times treble damages. I mean, it could be massively expensive for NER. They don't have the kind of assets that this could be, and it would be a pretty significant hit on the industry. What's also interesting, and this is another sort of side piece to it, I'm trying not to be doomsday about this. I want to give background because I actually think there's a very easy way this all ends, and our industry is going to continue on in a different fashion, but in a positive way. Just want to be clear about that. But this isn't the problem we're also facing is because Anywhere and Remax settled, they waved the white flag and basically just said, we're not going to fight this. We're done. And this is for these cases. Now, 20 markets plus Missouri, that means there's a lot of other opportunities across the United States, right? To your comment, how do you not stop further litigation from occurring in other markets across the US? We are all currently susceptible to what I call copycat litigation. That is, they basically said, we're not going to fight this. We can't win. That just told every ambulance chasing lawyer in the country, like, oh, well, here's exactly how to file this case and go after every other brokerage that wasn't part of the current, defendants. And so we're all open right now to potential further litigation, which is why NER needs to settle these cases. And they're going to get pressure as soon as another case is filed. So like if NextHome gets sued, which I'm one of, 10,000 brokerages or franchisors out there that would essentially be named, they're going to start to get pressure on settling these cases because your E&O policies, your general liability policies, and your D&O policies will not cover class action antitrust claims. There's no coverage for it. You would be out of pocket for your defense expenses, which no one can afford the lawyers. Not even I can afford the lawyers. So the ultimate way this goes, and we're going to see this come out, like it's not public yet on Anywhere or Remax's settlement. The essentially what terms were agreed to in the settlement, but it's fairly obvious that they would have said, we will only settle if you open the class. What that means is we're currently being sued by, the plaintiffs in Morel in 20 different markets, and we're being sued by Burnett and Sitzer in Missouri. There's all these other markets where we could be sued. We're not going to agree to a settlement unless you open the class for the rest of everybody else in the United States to join. So Yeah, so think of it like Aaron Brockovich. Like remember the movie Aaron Brockovich, and they opened the class and everybody jumped in. You get less money, but you get some money now. And it's important to really make note of this because a lot of people are going very extreme apocalyptic on this, which makes no sense. Like Anywhere and Remax just said, here's the cash we have. We can afford this, or we'll just file bankruptcy and then have fun. You're not going to get anything. And so the plaintiffs have agreed to these settlements. And I firmly believe if the lawyers were smart, which they are, they said, we're only going to settle if we open up all 50 states into the class. So a plaintiff might have gotten $1,000 if it was a smaller class. Now they're going to get $100. I'm making up a number here, but the concept's the same. Why I say it's important for NAR to settle these cases is this copycat litigation thing is a serious problem because the industry can't afford to defend itself. NAR could do a settlement where they say, we're going to settle for, again, I'm making up a number here. It's kind of a number people are tossing around, $2 billion. And they go, we're going to do a dues assessment over 4 years. All of our NAR members are covered in the settlement, so you won't be sued further. We open the class nationally. We bring everybody who sold a house in, by the way, 5-year statute of limitations on these claims. So everybody who sold a house in the past 5 years can join the class. Here's $2 billion to go around. NAR has leverage because they've got 1.5 million constituents. And a lot of people go, well, people just leave NAR. That would be stupid because, in my opinion, if NAR does it right, they would do a settlement where it's for NAR members so that the membership stays with NAR and then you get the benefit of being part of that. Look, spending $1,600 over 4 years, my lawyers are $1,200 an hour. I'd take that deal any day, all day, humanly possible. So to me, I think this is where this goes. They open the class, they bring everybody in, they bring all of their membership in. There's a global settlement. I'll talk about the changes in a minute that occur. But to me and the lawyers I'm speaking with, this is where this is all going to end, unless we win, which great. I still think, and I'm in this different camp, as I'm going to explain in a second. It doesn't matter if we win. The changes that I'm going to talk about momentarily are coming anyway from the Federal Trade Commission. And that is the thing that no one's addressing. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So let me stop there and see if you got additional questions.
So the MLS PIN in Massachusetts, it's not a realtor-owned MLS.
That's why NAR was not a defendant.
And they were not a defendant, but they settled. And have they agreed to take it out of the MLS, the compensation?
The MLS is going to be so the MLS will have settled. To be clear, that has not been approved yet. And
Right.
The DOJ just intervened, wants to interject in the settlement now, which was just talked about, just came on the wire yesterday. That's why, it's why
talking about can change.
Yeah, to me, this is so clear of just where this is going to go, that all of this, we have to fight. I get it. But this future I'm going to share with you is coming. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters and it doesn't matter because I'll explain in just a second. And nobody even knows what I'm about to share because no one's ever read this stuff. The current administration wants to see in its view, and I'm not going to debate whether I agree with it or not. I'm just giving you Biden's view and this administration's view is they want to come in and help consumers. They are basing a lot of their research on the Cato Institute. It's a report that was done in 2021 about our industry. Ironically, libertarian, and they got it all wrong. But they view our industry as what we call tying. And I'm going to simplify the concept of you're having to pay for 2 services at once. It's in tying compensation. It's wrong, but they view it that way. And that's just probably a good lead in to explain this. So just want to make sure I get my dates right on this. So in the summer of 2021, the Cato Institute came out with the anti-competition in buying and selling homes. Chad, I'll send this to you. You can send it and put it up on somewhere on wherever you're going to post this. And This is part of the, I'm just going to give you a snippet from the actual report. So, quote, the most problematic of these rules, referring to our industry, by the way, is the requirement that sellers predetermine before even knowing the buyer, the commission paid to the buyer's agent. This constitutes, quote, a tying practice, which fixes brokerage prices and stifles competition within the industry. Okay. I don't agree with it, but that's what it is. Now, here's the part that no one's actually read. So Biden in July 9th of 2021 signs an executive order called the Promoting of Competition in America Economy Plan. Section 5, subsection H, to address persistent and recurrent practices that inhibit competition, the chair of the FTC, in the chair's discretion, is also encouraged to consider working with the rest of the commission to exercise the FTC's statutory rulemaking authority, subsection 6, unfair tying practices or exclusionary practices in the brokerage or listing of real estate. It's literally stated in the executive order that the FTC has complete authority to come in and rewrite the rules. So I want to be clear with this statement. What that means in simplistic terms is, let's just hypothetically say that we win these cases. Go NER, go defendants, great, we won. Here's the problem. The FTC is sitting on the sidelines. I've spoken to a former FTC lawyer who was literally there. Is sitting on the sidelines, and so is the DOJ, watching these cases, as you just saw yesterday with the DOJ now intervening within the proposed settlement of MLS PIN. They're sitting there watching this. It makes no sense politically for the DOJ in an election year to interfere with this if the civil cases will end up causing the result they're looking for. Why would you? It'd be stupid. Nobody wants to do that. But if they don't get the result they're looking for, what do you think the FTC is going to do?
Step in and take charge.
Right. So the point behind all of this is this industry needs to get a grip on the way things are going to go. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It's either the civil cases or the FTC. And as I said, now it could be that we get all the cards lined up for us. You know, we win the cases and whoever on the Republican side or somebody maybe even on a Democrat, obviously that's not likely because Biden's going to be running, you know, without a change in administration and a pullback of that executive order, you got a lot of things that would need to happen in order for this to not occur. I personally believe, again, this is not my political views. I just don't think, I think it's a very high likelihood that the incumbent will stay in power. And I don't think this change will occur. Again, regardless of opinions, that's just the way I think this will end up going. And we have some pretty significant things to face as a business. So that's a good stopping point before I explain where I think all this goes. I'm going to make it all nice and shiny now. So.
Yeah, great information. We're ready for the
shiny.
Okay. This is not a end of the world thing. I've spent 2 years studying this stuff, talking to every lawyer, looking at use cases, et cetera. There's a really great use case for this out of the Northwest MLS. Now, while it's technically optional up there, what they have done and what you can do can be done across the rest of the United States. So let me explain how this post-lawsuit, post-FTC world will likely look. Number one, NAR is incredibly good at lobbying. That is what they do incredibly well. Despite all the nonsense and all the things going on with NAR and all the problems in leadership and everything that's happening right now, the one thing that everyone needs to get a grip on is that NAR does incredibly well at essentially lobbying Congress to not screw up our country any more than they already do on a daily basis. So private property rights is one of the things NAR does a very good job of. I've had Shannon McGann on my podcast. She's literally the chief, for lack of a better word, lobbyist. Like, we do a very good job as an industry making sure that policies are put in place that are pro-consumer and also help our industry. That's their job. And our industry without NAR would not look anything like it does today, to be clear with my statement. If NAR went away, our industry would be screwed across the board. Policies would be enacted by people elected to positions that would not understand what they're doing. And without lobbying, we would have some very serious problems in the way real estate operates in the US. Now, all that being said, that same force, I guarantee you, is working on ways to be able to make sure that a buyer's agent's compensation could be financed in a loan. So we would be seeing changes occur through Fannie and Freddie to make that happen. No one has told me in NER that this is occurring. Logically, it would make sense. These conversations are going on. And I've spoken to anecdotal people who are like, yes, these are conversations that are occurring. I have no official confirmation that that's happened, by the way, but makes sense. Number two, this is why this is not it's not a nothing burger, but everyone needs to just calm down. So in the Northwest MLS, a lot of times what happens when a seller doesn't want to, the agent will sit down and this small use case, the seller goes, well, I don't want to offer compensation to the buyer's agent. Like, okay, but I want to be very clear what's going to happen here. The buyer, because your house you're trying to sell is likely going to be bought by a first-time home buyer, is going to stretch every dollar they have to be able to buy this house. And likely they've signed a buyer broker agreement with the agent. And because the buyer likely can't afford to pay those fees, you're going to see the purchase agreement come across with the fact that you will need to pay the buyer's agent's compensation. It used to be, by the way, that I did it. I collected whatever amount and gave a portion of that to the buyer's agent. I can't do that anymore. By the way, post-lawsuit world, just want to be clear in my statement. So you're thinking how this is going to go after these lawsuits occur. You're going to sit with a seller. You're going to explain, this is how I'm compensated, what I'm paid. And you need to be able to be prepared to offer compensation to the buyer's agent, because the purchase contract is going to get written that you're going to pay the buyer's agent directly. And if you do not offer that, I want to be clear, it's very likely the deal won't happen because the buyer can't afford to pay those fees. They're already paying a fortune for your overpriced house as it is. Jokingly aside, we all know I'm kind of kidding, but kind of true. Like, there's no inventory. Like, prices are ridiculously high. Buyers are strapped to be able to afford anything. Interest rates are high. This is a conversation we're going to have with a seller. This isn't a complicated conversation. This is how the world is. Wake up. And so you're going to write the contract so that the buyer or the seller pays the buyer's agent directly. And 98% of the time they'll do it. You know why? Because they want to sell their damn house. Like, they're going to get every offer written the same way. And this is how it's going to occur. In other cases where they don't, in these rare cases, by the way, that's my dog Bailey. What you'll see is they'll have the option to finance that in the loan. I believe this is going to be a common thing. I think this is, and I'm the only one saying this because I just see this very differently than most. This is probably a good thing. Why I say it's a good thing is we need to get better at articulating our value to buyers. We suck at it as an industry. We've never had to really explain what we do. We should treat a buyer the same way we treat a seller. Sit down, explain what we do. Do a presentation. Talk about the 178 things you do when working with the buyer. Talk about the time that's involved. All of those things are part of what we should be doing. And by the way, the buyer's going to go, damn, I didn't realize there was that much work involved in a transaction. I mean, you three sell real estate. Do you think there's more work involved working with a buyer or a seller? Buyer. So like, we just need to get better at that, explaining that value and articulating that value. And I happen to know no buyer who does this transaction 2 to 3 times in their life wants to do this on their own. They don't. They want somebody to help them with this process. We just need to articulate that. I think right now, so you'll see 12 states across the US require buyer broker agreements currently. It's required. I think you'll see all 50 states do that. It's already happening. I know a lot of associations are working on legislative changes to make that occur. So it's a standard process, which, by the way, is a good thing. We need to establish fiduciary. I work for you, and in return, you're going to pay me X. This is what I do. It's very clear. None of this sub-agency crap, this dual agency crap, like none of that stuff is actually pro-consumer. And which is why the DOJ and FTC want to see these changes. When we talk about this being more like lawyers, I don't agree with that statement when it's like, oh, it's going to be hourly. First of all, you can't do it hourly. Our IRS carve-out doesn't allow that. Number two is hourly would probably cost more for the consumer than the way we're currently doing it. But I do agree with the concept that you can't hire a lawyer to represent you on both sides of a deal. It doesn't work that way. That's a conflict. We should have an agent represent the buyer, an agent represent the seller. That is a very clear differentiation of who we are, what we do, and candidly who we serve. I don't see this being apocalyptic. I see this being cooperation in the MLS is probably done. It becomes a data repository, an advertising repository, a tech repository, all the other things the MLS does a great job of. Certainly, I think you'll see consolidation. I think that the way that we negotiate, you'll sit down with the seller, talk to them about what you do, how you get paid, explain to them why compensation is important for the buyer's agent, why it will likely happen that way. Buyer's agent sits with the buyer, explains their value, signs a buyer broker agreement, gets them to agree to it. Financing option, or the seller will pay. Most of the time, the seller will pay it. We continue on. And here's the best part. There's no more investigations. There's no more lawsuits. There's no more FTC. There's no more DOJ. There's probably 20 to 30% less realtors in the business. Good riddance. Like we need to cut out this bottom people that aren't in this full time anyway. Like that just needs to happen. You'll see MLSs consolidate, associations consolidate. Will we lose our lobbying power? No. NAR just double the dues. I don't care. Like there's more business to go around. Who cares? Like to me, that's just a logical step forward. And it's maybe a little Pollyanna, but I genuinely think that's how this is going to play out. We are trying to delay the inevitable. That's going to happen. So
I would agree with you. That not that that matters, but I do agree with you that the low end, the realtors on the bottom, we have no real need for them. I mean, it's just so easy to get your license. It's silly.
yeah, look, I mean, I don't have any issue with people coming into our business. Licensing, we've tried to fix this problem through licensing, but the government doesn't want that. Like in California, we have like 120,000 realtors and 220,000 licensees. It's not that our industry hasn't tried to change that. The state doesn't want to do it because those are renewal fees and the state's broke. So it wants that. Like it's not due to lack of trying. I agree with you, by the way, to be clear, that we need to make licensing harder. This is just an easier way to get around it. It's like, you're going to have to be good at your job. You have to be able to very clearly articulate your value to a buyer, or they're not going to want to pay you what you want to be paid. Great. I'm for that. Let's make our industry more professional and better than what we are. Same thing with the seller. And the really great agents, even, middle of the road agents are going to do fine. Great agents are going to do better. And the bottom 30% is going to go away. Okay. I think it's a positive because we have too many MLSs. We have too many associations. You get rid of 30% of the dues. You see the consolidation happen faster and we become a better industry. I just literally think this is going to be long-term. There's going to be some pain along the way, but I think that long-term we end up being better at what we do. And I am not of the opinion at all. I say this to Wall Street people. I do this presentation a lot. Like, well, do you see a need for the realtor? Hell yeah, I do. Like, first of all, where on the planet of the United States is a buyer going to want to do this shit on their own? You can't even have an income anymore without mom and dad both working. Throw kids into the mix. And it's like, I mean, I have a 2.5-year-old, so I get it. Like, all I'm trying to do is figure out how to offload things to someone else so I can actually spend an hour with my kid. Like there's no scenario, no is a little extreme. There's majority of the people are going to want somebody to sit down with them and advise them on how to do this complicated process, which is only getting more complicated. The disclosure package, when my mom bought her house 2 years ago, she's retired realtor, and she bought in a 55 plus community. You can thank California. Disclosure package was 126 pages. She was been a realtor for 25 years. She had no idea any of the shit that was in that. Like she's been retired for 10 years. It's all new to her. So we had a NextHome agent that sat down and helped us through the whole transaction. My point is like, it's not easy to do this and you do it so infrequent. You need somebody to advise you on something that's of this magnitude. Do I think the way we are compensated will change? Somewhat. I think that you'll see percentage as we currently do still be the standard. I think you'll see companies come out with flat rates. We'll do the whole thing for X. And I think you'll see a menu of services that will come to bear. But I want to be clear with my statement. That's not anything new. That's been around a long time. And the companies who have tried that in the US have actually all filed bankruptcy. So I can go further back than most people know. Foxtons came over from the UK, tried that model, bankrupt. Purple Bricks, most recent one, came over, tried that flat fee model, bankrupt. Rex, same thing, discount model, bankrupt. Ironically, in the United States, all the studies that I've read and looked at, most consumers genuinely want to work with what they think, or not think, but they classify as a full service. They want somebody to just help them from beginning to end. And I think that those models, while they will pop up, I don't think they'll be the majority of the transaction. I think it will be, they'll gain in a little bit of popularity, and there'll be some segment of the market that does that, but certainly not a majority of the transaction. So there you have it.
Very informative. We appreciate you taking the time. Definitely.
Yeah, share it. Look, share the information out with people. What I'm trying to do more than anything is, you're going to hear a lot of rhetoric. You're going to hear a lot of misinformation. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where these three people were on it talking about it. And I was like, oh my God, everything they're saying is wrong. So I think that the important part is for the industry to understand it, which I hope makes a lot more sense, and then start preparing. And so that's the final piece I'll leave you with. The most important thing to be doing right now is to, number one, if you don't use a buyer broker agreement, go read it, get used to it, start using it, start articulating your value. Secondarily with that, a buyer presentation. Do not take an appointment with a buyer any further without doing a presentation. Get good at it. Even if you don't need to, do it anyway. Like, sit down, go through consultation, get really comfortable talking about what you do to help people. NAR had a really great piece that they put out, like the 179 things a realtor does on the buy side of a transaction. It's a really great marketing piece. Use it. Like, start talking about that. And what you're preparing yourself for essentially the future. Those are the two starting points. Get really good at negotiation. Go pick out like 3 of the best negotiation books. Start reading them, thinking about how you're going to negotiate deals. Like, how do you do different terms? How are you going to negotiate with the seller's agent? Like, start rethinking this concept. My view is, prepare now. If it happens, which it's likely going to, like I said, at some point, you're fully prepared. You've been doing this stuff. It ain't no big deal. Get used to it. You'll be a better agent. And if we did win all of this stuff, you're still a better agent. Like, you just prepared anyway. So you've just gotten better at your job. And if it does go the way that I think it will go, you're not going to be stressed. You'll be like, man, I've been preparing for 6 months to a year. This is a cakewalk for me. We know what we're going to do. We know how to structure our purchase contract. Like, you just prepare, and then you'll be ready to go. A lot of agents will not be, and you'll pick up market share. Simple as that.
Excellent.
Okay. I'm a little over. Apologize.
Thank you. No, definitely.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good. You have any questions, let me know. So
Thank you.
We'll think of some.
Thank you.
Thank you.